Welcome to Design Notes. I'm Liam Spradlin, and this week I spoke with Manuel Clément and Robbie Tilton of Google's Daydream VR Labs. Manuel's experiences include designing for Chrome and the nuanced UI of self-driving cars, and Robbie's background has seen him designing for non-traditional displays, including Google Glass. So the pair have a fascinating insight on where VR is now, what contributes to a good VR design process, and what it takes to create a great virtual experience. In the episode, we cover everything from the human enough experience of seeing other people represented as googly eyes, to how to make mundane tasks like spreadsheets more human, and how 2D designers can get up and running for virtual reality. Let's get started. All right, hey Manuel and Robbie, welcome to Design Notes. Thanks for coming on.
Hey, thanks for having us.
Cool, so I guess just jumping right into it, I want to just talk about who you guys are and what you do, and how you got to where you are. So whoever wants to go first.
Robbie, go ahead.
All right.
Volunteering, Robbie.
So my name is Robbie Tilton. I'm a designer and prototyper on the Daydream team at Google, working on virtual reality interfaces, prototypes, UX, UI. Prior to VR, I was working on Google Glass, and I spent a little over 2 years there doing platform design. And prior to that, what got me into the whole design industry was actually a little pivot in my career made through going back to grad school. And I went to grad school at NYU, a program called ITP. And it's a really cool program. If you're listening to this and you want to get into design or technology, it's a really cool program that kind of mixes art, science, and engineering all together. So you learn a little bit of prototyping, you learn a little bit about design, and you get to mix all of that together with some art. And while I was at ITP, I did a lot of work with non-traditional displays. So mostly 3D displays when I say non-traditional. And I actually made about 4 displays while I was there and built all the interfaces for them. And coming out of graduate school, Google Glass had just been announced, and to me that was my dream project. And it worked out. It ended up being a good fit and stayed at Google since.
Cool. So I'm Manuel Clément, and I'm a designer slash prototyper on Daydream as well. We've been working very closely together, so very much the things that Robbie talked about. Something I would say about myself is, so I've been about 2 years on the Daydream team. I would say right after Cardboard, the original Cardboard was announced at Google I/O in 2014. I was very much audience at that point. I didn't know much about the project, and in the summer right after that in 2014, more VR people got together to do something like a whole platform, and we just announced Daydream, and all that stuff was being prepared, and so that's when I joined it. So 2 years. Before that, I spent a year in Chrome. UX, where I redesigned Chrome for Android and iOS with a new material design, aesthetics, and visual language, including motion. My role was actually very much contributing to the core motion aspects of material design. Presented that at that same I/O 2014 when the Cardboard was announced. So I crossed paths with the people then. What I would say is, so I worked on Chrome OS as well and a bunch of other stuff, and it was fun to work on Chrome team. Before that, I spent 2 years on the self-driving car team, and I was first designer on the team, and we had a very small UX team, and we built a lot of stuff from the grounds up, starting from cars that had like wires everywhere and screens and kind of scary sounds to something that's really sleek, and you can see on freeways around Silicon Valley, and you can see like a smaller version that is in Mountain View and in other smaller towns. And I'm really proud of that project. It involved both like hardware, software, a lot of kind of human, very much bare-bone human-computer interaction in a way that the interface is not very visible, and you might think, oh, it's a self-driving car, there's no UI, but actually there's a ton there. How do you communicate with the user? How do you reassure the user that the car sees the people around itself? And I could go on forever about this, but it was very, very interesting to come up with these new patterns. And maybe I'll talk about UI patterns in VR later, and then there's a connection there a little bit where it's kind of like a new world. So that was 5 years ago, and I started that, and so I've been at Google for 5 years. And prior to that, I spent 10 years at Microsoft, where I worked on various teams, including Windows, several versions of Windows, and then as a very much a prototyper, so exploring a lot of things, many of which didn't ship, but were very interesting to explore, and spent several years in, including within those 10 years, several years working on UI design tools actually that are now, I think, still part of the SDK years later. And before that, really quick, I was very much involved in the web design scene between 97 and maybe 2002 until I joined Microsoft. And it was very Flash heavy. And now it makes people kind of laugh a little bit. But it was very interesting because the web was very much kind of like there was no huge UI patterns back in the day. The websites that were serious, quote unquote, were a bunch of image tables. So there were image tables with, no fonts and all that stuff that we have now, and no super fast code. And so community of artists and crazy people were pushing Flash back in the day a lot. And I was part of that, and I thought it was a lot of fun to do that and got me started. So that's my background.
Cool. Yeah, I definitely remember the image table websites, what that experience was like. So for listeners, if you haven't guessed, this episode is going to be really VR heavy. But before we get into that, I have to rewind back to your experience at Chrome, Manuel.
Yes.
Specifically the T-Rex game.
Yes.
Because my coworkers at Touch Lab and I have a kind of like internal leaderboard for that whenever the internet goes down. So I just can't avoid mentioning it. It's interesting to me because I saw something about it on your website where it's kind of positioned as a project with its own design team, which is really fascinating to me. So I just wanted to know a little bit about what motivated the team to implement this, and like what does that look like when a feature like that gets put into a major product?
Okay, so I'm going to try to be brief and interesting because it
Sure.
was actually 3 years ago when we did this, 2.5 years ago at least. I'm trying to remember. So what's interesting about Google, and this is what happened on that team, is that people have kind of crazy ideas here and there, and they give them code names that are really fun, like Corgi or whatever. And then people kind of in the trenches, so to speak, grab each other and say, oh, what about we designed this, we designed that, and it's kind of like things just happen grassroots. And I sound like I'm a recruiter here, like, come to Google, it's very exciting, people are happy drinking free smoothies. But the thing is, actually, that's why I go there every day still, because it's kind of like,
The free smoothies.
yeah, exactly. No, no, I go because I work with Robbie, so I get to hug him and stuff. No, but the thing is, those crazy ideas like the T-Rex game, I think I walked in the office one day and people were having so much fun on a whiteboard drawing a bunch of ideas. And very quickly I found myself in a room and we designed this game. I mean, it was like we were paid to do this, which is crazy. And we were designing, what I participated in was kind of general game mechanics, the way you can jump up and down and whatever. It's a very simple game, but we defined the model together, and it was very much organic. And then we went off in different directions. Somebody was writing the code, the engineer on Chrome. Somebody was making some sounds, and I made all the sounds. Now there's like one or two sounds. It's very, very simple, but that's also the beauty of it. We could have done crazy stuff with sounds, and we're like, no, 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 it should be like Super Mario Land, on Game Boy, and it's very specifically looking at the end of the day and sounding like that. So there was each of us contributed like certain specific things, like the strips of animated sprites and stuff, and sounds, and all came together. Yeah, but it was a team effort, and it took a while, and it's kind of like a side project, what we call 20% project. And what's cool about it is that it's really wacky, and we didn't really ask permission, so to speak. And that's the part I was talking about, being Google and me sounding like a salesperson. But we do come up with some crazy stuff, and like we don't really ask permissions. And people generally even above us, so to speak, in the org chart, are actually genuinely excited about stuff that comes up like this in the hallways, so to speak. So that's the process of it, I would say. And then we just try the game and figure out what makes sense to change. But it kind of took a life of its own, if you will. We release it, and Chrome is used by like 1 billion people or something, and it's just out of control, right? It's just that many people listening. Beep, the sound. I mean, to me, that was kind of cool to imagine. How many people heard that sound? How many people heard Katy Perry? And I'm like, well, maybe it's just like Katy Perry, It's about 1 billion people. So, and just played the game, made people happy. My son, he's in middle school, and he told me that everybody at school was playing it, and it was just kind of cool to hear that, like a giant arcade, like world scale arcade.
Yeah, it's from a user perspective, these touches just kind of appear out of nowhere. So it's interesting to hear that this is like somebody's real project, and there was a process behind this and everything. But yeah, so moving on to VR. I'm personally super excited about VR, and I want to get involved in it. And there were tons of talks at I/O about VR. And I think that from those, we got a good glimpse of what Google's up to. But on a more personal level, what excites you guys about VR? Super vague question, I know, but...
So what excites me most is just exploring other people's imaginations. People are always the most interesting thing to me, and we have no idea how other people think, and just from an imagination standpoint, I just love seeing the worlds that other people create in their heads and being able to manifest that in a physical space that you can experience is just amazing. And I think about my dreams sometimes and compare them to virtual reality. And virtual reality is so much you're so much more present. They're much richer. They have more dimensions, both visually, but from everything, just like haptics when you touch something in your imagination, which maybe you'll just gloss over in a dream that you might be having. So I'm just really excited just to explore where our mind takes us, and for people to express themselves creatively through art, or create new tools for them to solve new problems, or to visualize things that we don't really have words to describe currently. So that's like the number one thing I'm most excited about. And then secondly, I'm also just excited about having fun. And in VR already, I've had so much fun. And I think it's just such a great entertainment experience as well, that I'm super excited to see how the medium is going to be pushed beyond what we have for television, movies, and all our previous existing forms of entertainment.
So just to follow up on that really quick, do you see VR as I don't know if replacing is the right word, but do you see that kind of overtaking television or becoming like an additional thing, like we have TV, movies, and VR experiences?
So for me, TV is already gone. We use the label TV in a really loose way right now. So like when I watch Netflix on my computer, I kind of call it TV, even though it's not TV. So I part of it is it's a little hard to define since the medium's in transition right now. I definitely think people will do things like watch movies and TV, quote unquote, TV shows in VR. I don't see that as like a replacement from watching it on your laptop or phone as well. So I would say it's not necessarily a replacement, but if you really want to watch Game of Thrones in an IMAX theater, and obviously Game of Thrones isn't in an IMAX theater, but in virtual reality, you could have that. So depends on what people are looking for the specific moment, but I definitely think people will use it for that as well.
Cool. Yeah. So I'm trying to express that in a way that would make sense here. Let me think. So to me, it's interesting because I'll talk about my personal experience with VR, a little bit like what Robbie talked about. So we're in VR, we create these worlds essentially, right? So I'll compare it with like designing an app on the phone for it, kind of like to make the parallel. People are listening, they might be UX designers, or they think about things that are on 2D screens normally. So when you put things on the screen and you hand a person a phone to try your prototype, your interface, they're kind of looking for something on the phone. I don't know if that makes any sense, but there's like this task of like looking for something. Maybe you're playing a game. I guess that's possible as well. But in VR, it's more like, where am I? And you turn around and look around. And what's interesting is, even if you just put one element floating in the room, I've mentioned that before. Maybe it's a glowing orb in the dark, or maybe it is just a cube. Um, and watching somebody go through that, they'll try to find meaning out of it and try to guess what the heck is going on. Is it a game? Is this an application? But you get into these really, really interesting situations where you observe people do things, and there's these meanings that come out of very simple elements. And it's just, what it feels like is that VR right now feels like there's this field with rocks, and literally you're like, nobody's really, I mean, maybe a few rocks were turned over, but you turn over a rock and you're like, wow, there's like a pearl in there, or what is it? And basically you have so many things to explore, and very simple things become marvelous. They become, people are just thrilled, and they become kids just because, I don't know, because they see a chair that's tiny in the room, and they're just like, talk about it for 10 minutes, like, look how small that chair is. Oh, I feel like this is for kids, or maybe I'm a giant. And it's just like very simple things like this. Or maybe they see their hands, or maybe you put like flowers instead of their hands, and they might stare at their hands for a long time, like, this is amazing. And maybe there's something that's about novelty here that will wear off, but still you remember having hands that are flowers. And it's just, to me, it's just something totally different. And as designers, like, this is so cool, right? You get to, it's a brand new field for you to explore. Um, Also, something I'm interested in VR is that today, when somebody tries something, they might say, "Oh, that was a great demo," and that's fine because it's a new platform, and there's, one person, two people shops. Put something on Steam for the Vive, for example, or on Gear VR, or on Cardboard, and they're fairly snack-sized experiences. What I'd like to see, and I think is going to happen, and I've seen happen with the things Robbie and I built, is that you make something very, very simple, but actually does something that is productive, whether it's productive and one day will be the job of someone, like building a house in VR, like something we showed at Google I/O, like an architect simulation, or whether it is something that is just very relaxing. The 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 thing is, I think all of these things should feel like demos. They should feel like simple things. They should almost feel like games, because in real life the awesome stuff feels fun. Even the things that, like, we have a job, like, this is kind of a meta example because Robbie and I are excited at work, and we get paid for it, and it's in VR. But the point is, maybe we'd be doing something else like carpentry and just loving it, right? Everybody's got their own stories of just being in the flow in something they're doing. And that situation may be very simple. So if you're turning wood on the lathe and you're making a vase, or you're making something else like table legs for a table, what you have in front of you is just something that's spinning, a piece of wood, and you're holding a tool in your hand. That's like simple. Actually, in VR, you can probably make that in a couple of days. Like, Robbie and I go off and make that very quickly. But there's people doing this just as a job, as a passion, spend thousands of hours to master this skill. Think about it. It's not like you don't have like a million tanks being modeled and the whole world, and 200 people team for 4 years building this, and yet it's so magical. So basically, with very simple elements, you create these situations that you remember being in, and that enable magical things. And I think that's very specific to VR.
It's a lot to digest.
And just to add one thing that Manuel made me think of, when smartphones first came about, they replaced a bunch of other things that you'd carry around with you. So like, you'd have your camera, you'd have your video game system, and a bunch of other things. Basically, the phone came around, and that one tool could be all these other tools. Sort of Manuel talking about the woodworker also makes me think about how virtual reality can combine so many physical tools into one tool as well, which is incredibly powerful.
Yeah, and I would say people who are interested in this should take a step back when they think about designing for VR. So rather than kind of opening Sketch or Photoshop and laying out a UI, and that might be fine, you might need that. Thinking about the whole experience. So I'll stop and just illustrate this for a second. The way I personally, some of the best things I've built in VR were things that I first sketched. And as designers, we understand sketching. We sketch storyboards, we sketch on whiteboards. But the way I start designing for VR is I draw a person, as if I was designing a space, right? I draw a person, and then I draw the architecture around that person or whatever they're interacting with. And this helps me understand that this is something you're in. This is this is the this is your world instead of this is something you're looking at like a phone or a black mirror, so to speak. No pun intended. Um, and so that's something to think about. Like if you're interested in VR and you listen to this, that's great. Um, Geek about it. Like think about like rethink everything you've learned so far and take a step back and saying, I'm watching myself use a UI, or I'm watching the person do something. And this will actually guide you to make interesting decisions you would not have taken before if you just started in Sketch or Photoshop, or just drawing the UI without the person there. Some of the best things we built were like this. So Drum Keys is a volumetric keyboard, text input keyboard that is showcased in our talk at I/O, and also there's a blog post on the VR blog, Google VR blog. It shows a video of it and all that. So the way this was designed is a couple of us were talking, and somebody was like, "Oh, you made a drum. Uh, how about use a drum prototype and you put a keyboard in the air and you do that?" So basically, what I ended up doing right away is drawing I think it was 6 cells, one of those templates you found on the web of like a comic book page. And I drew people talking to each other saying, you know what, I'm going to type faster than you. And the other person's like, I'm down. And they would hold these marimba sticks or drumsticks, and they would be in this environment with like shag carpets, almost like a TV show. And it was a whole illustration, like a comic book. That was our spec to build a prototype. And what's interesting about this is people could read it, and I would say, like, what do you think about this? And then they would try the prototype and connect the two. So um, it's just like before. You design things, and maybe you think about sketching things, but you think about the environment you design. You're designing worlds. And so it's not always going to be like buttons you click on or toolbars or mouse cursors. So I kind of went on tangent, but think about the person in the space first.
Yeah, and I think as you were saying that, I just think about designing UI UX for mobile devices and how, we imagine the user's intention, but ultimately we're building for their hands. And so I guess with VR, like on some fundamental level, we have this whole entire system to account for with interaction and not just a finger, which is relatively static.
That's a good point. One thing that's interesting is one example of this not normal or kind of like you in a new world designer is we have an example that we call slides and ladders, and it has what it says. It has slides, it has ladders, it has gondolas, it has floating clouds, and that's also being shown on our talk at I/O. But what's interesting about this one is that you're in a platform and there's this slide that you see, and I've seen people try to click on it, they try to point and click because they're just used to having freaking UI everywhere, and it's like, no, what would you do? So when they sit down on the slide, we put some code behind that checks whether we can track their hands and head, and by making a decision when the person enters that zone and sits down comfortably, we give them a few seconds, and then boom, the slide goes, and it makes sense. So there was no UI to trigger it. That person didn't even need controllers. They just needed to like sit down there. As long as you can track their head in a 6 degree of freedom, like room scale, you could trigger a bunch of stuff in the world that would normally require, okay, where do we put the icon? Or do we put it on the controller? Do we put it on the floor? It's like, whoa, time out. Like, let's not talk about interface. Let's talk about what's going on in the world. So I personally, like, I'm thrilled to be able to do this at work and just like explore this stuff because, of years and years of shipping UI screen, which is fine. But this is a good example, this slide, of something that makes you think at a higher level and rethink what you know.
And just to add to that, totally agree on the sketching. The other thing is, rather than always designing within a screen, just kind of like standing at your desk or in your room and physically acting out what you would do. So imagining that you have superpowers, like doing gestures with your arms to understand how it would react if something came toward you, if you did like some sort of fishing motion to it. That's the type of stuff that you can't necessarily prototype super, super quickly. And it's also the type of stuff that you won't ever be able to get a sense for designing within like a Maya or Cinema 4D window, or even like a Sketch or Photoshop window. So I think there's a lot to do as well in terms of like physical space and getting out of the screen and sketching on a whiteboard, waving your hands around in front of that whiteboard. It's a different way of designing, especially when you're starting out in terms
That's
of
interesting.
sketching.
So what you said, Robbie, just to add to this, when you described this, I remember memories of working with Stefan Velker as a person I was working with on all these prototypes. We worked as pairs, and just to summarize for people listening, Robbie and I are both in something called Daydream Labs. The way we worked was two pairs. Each pair had a designer and an engineer, and also a program manager helped us run the whole thing. But anyway, and we each built a VR app per week per pair. So it was like 2 apps per week for 30 weeks, so 60 applications. In any case, it's funny what he described. It reminds me when I was working with Stefan a couple of times, we'd be in front of the whiteboard, and actually how we were brainstorming things is and talking to each other about like, oh, you know what would be great? And then we act it out, right? So we would try to draw it on the whiteboard with like arrows and boxes, and I was like, no, 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 no. And then I would get up, or he would get up and just like wave in the air. Oh, if you pick up this block and then you put it on the other block, this happens. And then it's just very theatrical. And just that's just mind-boggling as a designer to be in that room and just like talk about building doll houses and just like literally almost like standing on the table to explain like how big you could be. So yeah, there's a lot of that physical aspect of it as you communicate with people, and how you think about. You can test it by just moving around and just having good imagination.
And another reason why it's so fun to work in VR, you really get to like pretend you're a kid again. So if you put a kid in a conference room, which is where Manuel and I and Rob and Stefan are doing our brainstorms usually, like you put a kid in a conference room, they're not going to just like sit at the table. They're going to move around, dance, have fun, and the whole process is great. And then also building it out, you have to constantly iterate and have fun and move around and do things that aren't typical for let's say office work.
Yeah, we like I was saying, the comparison between just a finger and a whole body. I don't sit at my desk to do phone prototypes and just kind of like act out tapping things. That would not be nearly as compelling. But going back to your earlier point, Manuel, about just kind of the magic of these simple interactions, I have to say, like, I was not a huge believer in VR until I tried it. So probably the things that had the biggest impact on me were trying the Vive, and when the person operating the demo handed me the controller and I had the mask on and couldn't see the actual spatial position of my hand, but still was able to reach that and know that that was the right position, things like that. So I don't know really where I'm going with that anecdote, other than just kind of the discovery of VR and like making it accessible for people to understand why it's so cool.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Whenever I show people, well, most people I meet are friends, even the ones in technology, they're all skeptics of VR. And if I show them something like a Vive, and the second they see that controller in the air and they grab it, it's kind of like Manuel talking about looking at the flower hands. It's just they've changed their opinion completely. It's so magical to have the ability to move your hands in space, which sounds so like rudimentary, but we never have been able to have that before.
Yeah, the cool thing about this is, actually, I'll give another example a little bit. I love to. I have a Vive at home. I've had it for a while, and I try to have a lot of people go through, and I'm a dad. I have kids, and there's a lot of interaction with other parents, and there are other children. So a lot of people come to the house and just try stuff. And so, kids aside, who always amaze me when they try VR, they always have the best ideas. I just want to hire them. Is that an example is my father-in-law. He I'd say I think he's in his 60s, and he was a business guy. He worked in oil, and he's very pragmatic about things. He's also a maker. Like he builds things out of wood and metal. He's just fantastic. He taught me how to be a maker and very daring about building things and using very dangerous tools, which is awesome. And so anyway, but he came over and had the Vive here, and I had some things that I built with Daydream Labs, and I tried to talk to him about it. He was very unconvinced that there was like a future in all of this. It was like, he's older, but he remembered from a long time ago VR being there. I mean, Sega showed a VR headset at E3 in like whatever, 94. So, he's seen this stuff before. So what's interesting, what I'm going to bring up is, remember I said he's a business guy. He's a maker too, but he wants to see the money, like where's the money and all that. And I think this is very good to have these people around, by the way. So, to keep us real. So I tried to talk to him, but it was hard to explain. But then what got him very, very convinced and excited was I had him try Dollhouse. And Dollhouse is something we built. Again, I'm going to advertise our IO talk, building 60 prototypes. I show that as the last example. It's about experiencing the impossible. So what happens, you in a room, there's a table, it's a wood table, and there's a dollhouse in the middle, and it's a bunch of like blocks and rooms, and there's even like little chairs and stuff. And when you look at it, you're not sure what you're going to do, but by pulling your hands out and looking at them, you see that you're holding these sticks. And these sticks allow you to pick stuff up and toss them, throw them, pull. So very quickly, you can kind of like build a dollhouse, destroy it. There's also a 3D list box in the air. That sounds so skeuomorphic, like everybody who's doing flight design is going to like, pass out. But it's okay, people. Just open your eyes and listen. There's a 3D list box with actual objects floating in the air. And when you go there and pull things out, you basically can spawn like a million chairs, a million blocks, whatever you want. As a kid, it's like you have a massive box of Legos, and you can, it never ends. The fun never ends. So anyway, what I saw him do is he would build things and just, he became a kid very quickly. Now, this is not a business scenario, right? But so first he was really floored. He was like a kid. And then some feature we had in there was that you could see a little character. It looks like a little chess piece with a little Vive on top. So I modeled the Vive very quickly. I use a Modo, which is a 3D tool. So I modeled the Vive, and it's on top of this little column. It's almost like like a little chess piece. And when you pick it up and look at it, so you pick it up from the table, you look at it, it looks like it's you, basically. So when you place that chess piece like somewhere, anywhere you want, so on top of a building, inside one of those little rooms that you made, and then you press a button, then instead of being this giant person looking at a dollhouse, you become small like the doll, exactly where you put that little guy. And the first time you do it, like basically he started laughing and laughing and laughing, and he just had the greatest time. He took off the headset because he was a little bit like scared to fall. He was just a little bit surprised by it. But he looked at me and he said, okay, this last thing you showed me sold me. This is going to be huge. Like, it's going to be the biggest thing ever. And it was just fun to see this business guy. He's seen it all. He's seen computers being invented and all that stuff. And what got him excited was this like dollhouse building thing. So just something to have in mind is that even the simplest things that are made for maybe a different age group will actually maybe change your life or convince you to try a new technology, or that something is viable, even from a business standpoint.
Yeah, and I can't help thinking of like as a human, if you reached kind of a conscious, like self-aware age before discovering that your hands and feet can do things in the world. Like what those discoveries would feel like. And I guess it's kind of the same. Like we are just discovering our virtual hands and feet, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, the brain is the brain adapts to things, right? So you can let's say you're right-handed and you have trouble with your right hand, you get injured or something like that. You can learn to write with the other hand fairly quickly, and then maybe it might be longer. I'm not in people's shoes when they have to do that, but you can. I brought up that example before, but basically you could have people are injured against injuries. The brain can adapt with having another arm being attached to you or being outside of you, and you controlling it if they route your intention, your electric signals to a computer that then moves the robot. You can actually, it's not like moving your real arm, it's completely different. But however, you can actually learn how to move it as if it was your real arm. And some people say, oh, you could have 4 arms, no problem. And so this is very interesting to hear. Sounds impossible, but the point is, if you find yourself in VR and your hands are these floating controllers, you're not just pulling the headset off your face and you're horrified. Very quickly, you're okay to be floating there and have these floating hands. At term, we'll probably all be tracked entirely. But the point is, it's interesting to observe people even now with this nascent technology and just these hands floating in the air and just seeing the other people in the room being just floating heads. Is that, we don't give a damn. It looks real enough. Like you understand somebody's moving these hands because it looks organic in the way it's moving. And we can fill in the blanks a lot, and things don't have to be super realistic to actually make sense to you and being a new experience that no other human experienced before, which may actually be better than if everything was just realistic.
Yeah, I think about the like for instance, one of the examples that I saw at I/O was the shopping experience where the players are trying on hats and they're just basically like cardboard boxes with googly eyes. And that's like a human enough experience. And in fact, because we can't track the rest of the body, it's kind of like I think someone said in the talk, it's kind of disturbing because we just see this like rigid body that isn't behaving organically. But with the googly eyes, it's suddenly like very organic and very relatable.
Yeah, and just to add to the googly eyes one, if you see the talk, you'll notice a lot of the experiences we designed are also very open to lots of different things. So for example, the dollhouse one, you could use it for a lot of different things. You can make dollhouses, but you could do all sorts of other things. You can make your own stories. Besides building houses, you could, like Manuel was saying, you could just make a mess and have fun that way. There's also an animator, like an animation tool that we showed at I/O, where basically you have these 3D objects on a table, and you can just go ahead and reach out and grab and move it around. And as you move it around, it records the way it moves, and then you can rewind and play it back. And again, you can pretty much do whatever you like. Same with the shopping experience. You can try on hats, you can talk with people. The reason I want to bring up open-ended experiences and not being too literal or not being too high fidelity is, I think, as a designer, I think it's important to not be too specific at first with VR. I think it's important to, or at least the most successful apps that we prototype, I feel like, had a lot of room for different ways that different people could use it. And I think that's important to keep in mind, that you may be building or designing something for one specific thing, but some people want to use it in a completely different way. And that's okay. And you should embrace that and allow for them to have fun with it as well.
Yeah, you learned a lot from that too. So an example of something we built was, one of the first things we built was a virtual drum kit. We have Stefan in the talk explaining that, actually. You can see videos of it. But very quickly, we just put these boxes in the air, and when you hit them with your hand, with a little stick in your hand, it would just go boom, you can hear something. And we got the boxes to move and all that. The point that was interesting is at one point, so Stefan's really tall. He's like 20 feet taller than me. I'm exaggerating, but he's a taller guy than me, like a lot. And when he was putting something together in Unity and he would give me the headset, we worked together a lot. I would not be able to play the drums. It would be like too high for me. And then we work with Git or Perforce. I don't remember what we used in the beginning, but what's interesting is, so we would modify the same Unity scene, or we each have our own, and you could totally see who had made what, because mine was like a foot under under his, and he would be like moving everything up and say, well, it was too low, so I changed it. So what happened is that inspired us to put a feature which was like, well, maybe they can just grab a drum and move it. And so you could basically all of a sudden, when we watch people do it, is somebody else who's a little bit shorter than me tried the drum set. She put a headset on, and even for her, my configuration was too high. She, without being prompted how to do it, she just grabbed each drum in front of her and they were just like floating hexagons. And she moved them down slightly, and she started playing. And we were like, oh my gosh, this is like ergonomic adjustment without like sliders and crappy UI and stuff on top. It's like I can grab it, I can move it, now I can hit it, and there's no gravity, so it just floats in the air. We were completely flabbergasted, like we didn't plan to do this at all. Now what's interesting is then we made drums that were massive. So like 6 foot across, right? Like huge drum, like the size of the room. And then when we picked them up, it felt so good to lift this massive thing and be like, I am so strong. And then the next thing people did is they would make houses with the drums. They would just like make walls and a ceiling. And Stefan shows that in the talk. I mean, we were cracking up, like our abs were hurting by the end of the day. And it was great. It's like we didn't plan to do this, and yet those were some of the favorite features people had. They didn't dismiss the drums. They understood it was still a drum app. They didn't say, oh, this is not really good for drum app. So all this stuff just makes you think. So all these things are stories we're bringing up. They're not scientific studies per se, and it's just take it as they are, and maybe find questions for yourself or try stuff based on those stories.
I loved the drum example, by the way. I thought that was hilarious during the talk. But changing gears a little bit, I'm also curious about other types of experiences in VR, specifically, and this sounds really silly, but I'm actually quite fascinated by it. Things like mundane experiences in VR, like things that are currently boring and layered in like legacy of UI and UX. The example that I always go to is like, what will spreadsheets be like in VR? And I'm wondering what you guys think about that. Like, A, just as a baseline, do you think that even belongs in VR, or is there such a thing as something that doesn't belong? And B, how do you envision that? So, like, am I even asking the right question?
So, Manuel and I, we've talked about things like this before. To me, VR is a very human experience. It's very intimate. You're wearing something on your head. You have your hands. And I think there's a lot of this is my personal take. I think there's a lot of jobs, or let's say mundane things that you're talking about, like a spreadsheet. And if you showed me a spreadsheet, one of the last words I would use to describe it is human. So I think a spreadsheet in VR could be successful if you find a way to make it more human. And what does that mean? It could mean making that job fun. Maybe inputting these values changes your world and you get to see all the live results in front of your eyes. Or maybe I'm just making up stuff on the fly here. Maybe instead of like clicking on cells, or I guess I'm trying to think of the features a spreadsheet has. Like let's say adding up 5 cells to get the sum or average. Maybe there's a really fun way that you can do that. And bringing, not that everything has to be gamified, but bringing a level of humanness, a level of fun, a level of physicality, I think could make those apps successful. So I wouldn't write them off completely. I don't know the right answers or the right solution for that, but I think there's ways to make, I think everyone should have a fun job, first off. And I think jobs that require mundane tools, I think VR has potential to make them not mundane.
Yeah, it's funny, the spreadsheet example. So Robbie's got a very good answer for this, but as you were asking the question, I was thinking, so why are spreadsheets there? And well, I know why they're there. They're very useful. It's a killer app for computers, right? And it was early on. The VisiCalc, I think, was one of the first ones. But anyway, the thing is, it's a great metaphor for the flat screen. And so it was basically the computer terminal, the thing you're looking at, was a flat surface plugged to this brain that could just obliterate any human at understanding a large set of data. So, we just plug the screen to it, so to speak. And so it made sense to display these cells there. I think you can learn a lot from decades of making really good spreadsheets, and kind of taking a step back and say, what are they about? In a way that Robbie mentioned, that he brushed up on that a little bit. So I don't have the answer because I'm not like a spreadsheet god, far from it. But I would say, like, doing an exercise. If somebody out there, like somebody's listening and they're doing a lot of business and they think, hey, I'm going to do a venture on doing those kind of scenarios, you just have to go back and think about why are they there, what are they for, and like just kind of like think about the end result, the goal, the user goal for these experiences that currently are on 2D screens that are grids. Potentially, you could come up with something completely different in VR. The thing is, people might have to relearn those things. Just like when you open Excel, like I get really lost in it, even though I've used it many times before. But it's not very human itself. But it's fine. People just like they fly on Excel and they do all kinds of stuff and they become, more powerful. It's like superpowers. But so you have to kind of go back to the beginning, and are you able to match that level of productivity? Maybe you can go past it in some aspects. What might be interesting actually is having multiple views on the same thing. So maybe there's a spreadsheet somewhere, and that's one way to look at it. Maybe another one is you're in a field and you're picking up objects and you hug them, and when you hug them, that's what combines them or something. I don't know. So what I just said sounds like a crazy like kid dream or kindergarten drawing, and I think this is where you need to design in VR. You start from being a kid because you need to unlearn a bunch of stuff, and you need to like get that those hammers that hammered your head. You're growing up saying don't be creative, don't be creative, don't be creative. It's like you want to grab those and just throw them outside in outer space into the sun, and they need to burn. And so you need to like open.
I love it.
You need to be like a kid again. It's like the world we live in, the way we learn stuff at school, the jobs we have. They're just there for historical reasons. It doesn't mean that we are that way ourselves.
Right. And getting a thumbs up from Robbie. Yeah. And I totally agree with that philosophy, though. Like as a designer, I feel anytime I'm faced with a new challenge, I have the urge to walk through it backwards until the beginning of the universe, basically, and figure out like what the actual problem is. But so stepping back from like the ultra mundane of spreadsheets, I was super excited to see the VR home at Google I/O. So like kind of the home screen for Daydream. If you guys were involved in that, I would love to talk about kind of what went into it and, I guess what the considerations were for that, because it's I guess what I would call a more traditional interface than making an igloo of drums, but it's still very human and fun, at least from what I saw.
Cool. So I'll jump in first. So I've been on the team for a couple of years, and so I've done all kinds of stuff around the team. And some of the things I've done was explore certain type of interfaces to, launch applications and doing things like system UI notifications, which is stuff we showed at I/O. Actually, we showed that on stage. Not Robbie and I, but people on our extended team. So I'm personally familiar with that. For quite a while now, Robbie and I have actually not been involved too much in the creation of the current iteration of Daydream Home that's being shown. However, the team as a whole talks together. So the reason why I bring that up is because the UI that you see in Daydream Home that we're showing, it's going to work very well with everybody. It's very comfortable. You can look ahead and you don't have to turn your head uncomfortably. You don't have to look in weird places that's uncomfortable. Again, it's very much like a nice baseline for anybody putting the headset on. They'll look ahead and they'll be able to start applications and they'll be able to do their stuff. So it basically has a lower bar of entry, even though it can be very rich and beautiful, have and use stereoscopy to show this depth and this different layers you have in 3D. At the same time, so while the team is building this and the design process for this, which there's a talk about actually called, I think it's called design process, and then there's designing for Daydream, and all these people talk about building this. We have two design processes. One that's like I'm going to talk about Robbie and I over the last year, which was very exploratory on our own with input from everybody, including Daydream Home designers, of like, what's VR good for? And so we're like, education, shopping, and we go and explore these things. The way design process worked there was very open-ended, just a couple of people working together and then building things and learning. At the same time, on the other side of things, which is like, this is shipping soon, and so we have to like narrow it down, and everybody knows that who's building stuff out there. It doesn't have to be in VR. You have to like make decisions, and what's the hardware limitations, and is the controller how does the controller work, blah, 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 and how much code can we put in. So basically, that production level oriented design process was happening at the same time. We informed each other as well. So as Robbie and I and a few others on the Daydream Labs team were exploring wacky stuff, we were finding really good data from our studies that actually influenced decisions on the other stuff that you end up seeing on the Daydream Home and on the different transitions we're going to have and how the system settings and notifications are shown. Like all this stuff feed each other. So I would say for a lot of the time that for the foreseeable past, I would say Robbie and I have been influencing and definitely being a part of the effort, but we can't really comment on the current design of Daydream Home that much. And I would say just head over to Google I/O and look for design process something on the Google developer website channel.
The video is called VR Design Process. It's a great talk. You should definitely check it out. And as Manuel said, we're more these days observers than hands-on for Daydream Home. The one thing I want to add is Manuel mentioned the interface is very comfortable. You can do what you want to do really easily. I just want to talk about like laser pointer interfaces in general. So basically this idea where you can just point at whatever you like and then you can click. They're very, very efficient, and they allow you to put objects at a little bit of a further distance, which allows for just really comfortable objects to look at. So anything, there's certain parameters that define where the ideal comfort zone is for each headset. But when you have something at a little bit of a distance away from you, it's really easy to look at. It's comfortable. You can fit a bunch of content in your field of view, and you can easily get between applications and experiences. And I think in general, depending on our goals, we weren't making like Daydream Home isn't supposed to be some crazy game. It's supposed to allow you to get to those crazy games and do the things that you want to do in VR. So I think just from a designer's perspective or an observer, I think using a laser pointer interface is a really good application for something like that.
Yeah, the Daydream Home controller, which allows you to point at things, and so you don't have to like push a button that's on the headset itself. It's much more comfortable, kind of like holding a remote control. That the way it works lends itself really well. We know where you're pointing, and we know like if it's held upside down and all that. We also know how fast you're moving it around. So you can do quite a bit of things with that, and it's so yeah, that's the kind of interfaces that lend really well to that controller. Something that happened with the examples we talked about earlier, like the drums and all kinds of stuff like that, is that many of those were looking ahead at a full room tracked experiences where your hands are being tracked room scale or even world scale. I don't know. I mean, it's basically in space as well as your head. And so it's a little bit of a further away in the future, so to speak. And so some of these things are just harder to pull or don't make sense with the current iteration of the low cost mobile setup that is like the Daydream controller and the Daydream spec phones.
Cool. So I guess just to wrap up, as a designer, I want to be ready for VR. I'm super into it, if you can't tell. I'm learning Blender to get a handle on like 3D layouts and just kind of like getting my feet wet with that. If you look at my Twitter stream, you'll see a bunch of like ugly houses and grass and things. But I want to get the opinions of two experts for designers like me who are used to 2D UI UX. What is the right way to go, and how do I get involved?
Yeah, I love this question so much, just because maybe a year and a half ago I was in the same position, and I finally feel like really good about where I am and what I've learned and about designing for virtual reality. So it resonates with me just from a time perspective, and I think most people in this industry will say the same. So for me, I think the two biggest skills that I needed to pick up was one, learning a 3D package. It'll just empower you a lot for conveying your ideas and quickly prototyping. Even without any code skills, you can learn so much by just modeling something, even if it's just cubes, putting it into VR and just gain a sense of where things are, how big they are, and that alone will significantly help you move forward with VR design. On top of that is the second thing, which is sketching. Manuel talked about sketching a bit, but I never realized how critical sketching would be for me in design, because I think a lot of designers who have been doing it for a few years, we get really comfortable with apps like Photoshop, Illustrator, and Sketch, where we can start to use those tools as our sketching tool. But with VR, the tools are still very they're very new, and we're not at the same place where you can just like sketch a UI real quick in Photoshop, and then you know that it's going to be good. So I think drawing storyboards, like Manuel was saying, with people in it, just doing lots of quick iterations, because it's the cheapest form of designing. If I wanted to do, let's just say a laser pointer interface, I could quickly sketch like 100 of them in, I don't know, let's just say an hour, and then make informed decisions or choose 5 that then I would go on and put in Modo or C4D or Blender, whatever your 3D package tool is, put it in VR, and then you can really get a sense for it. As the tools and the platforms develop, I definitely think Sketch and Photoshop will be used much more, and the integration tools will be much better. I'm super excited for that. I think it'll open the doors up a lot more for designers. Obviously, learning how to code and prototype a little bit is very beneficial. But I think in general you can do a lot with the 3D package tool and sketching. And the other thing I would say is in terms of game engine, I would also think about picking up a game engine like Unity or Unreal. And when I say pick it up, learn how to open it, learn how to drag models into it and put materials in there, and click play and be able to view it in VR. I think that'll be essential as well. I'm going to let Manuel go ahead and give his answer. I'll probably jump back in with some more thoughts.
Yeah. Jump in at any point. I'm trying to think. So in my case, I've always done 3D stuff. In fact, that's how I got into computers, I would say, is I've started using 3D on 3D Studio, not Macs, but 3D Studio 3.0 on DOS, on computers that were, I think, 486 DX2 66 megahertz with 4 megs of RAM. I don't know how we could get this thing running on that at the time, but anyway, I was always fascinated by 3D and clicking around and having fun doing things. Even in the Flash days, I was doing 3D interfaces in the browser. Claim of Fame is like some of the first things that were done like that. I was part of that crowd. In any case, but I didn't work as a game designer, environment designer, and modeler. So this was always kind of on the side. I always do that on the side for my personal projects. In any case, in VR, that has proven to be very useful, because the tools change all the time. So I had to, if I update my tool, I have to learn new tools. So it's always the same thing. But definitely, either you have a background in 3D and you bring it, or you got to pick up a 3D package and learn it. I personally use Modo, M-O-D-O. I really like it. Not many people know about it, except in certain industries. Some game design firms, some video compositing firms use that, because it goes with other tools that the same company makes that are like really world class for that. In any case, a couple of things I would bring up is, first, it seems really daunting because you don't know, let's say someone who's listening doesn't know much about VR. You don't know much about VR, and then you don't know much about 3D, and it's like, oh my God. Or maybe you don't even know too much about coding. What you can do is learn things in isolation. So, for example, the Unity, let's say you pick up Unity. Well, the unity3d.com website, that's the official website, has a tutorial section, and actually has pretty nice step-by-step, like 5-minute videos, and they tell you how to type the code in and use it. Note what I'm saying here, it's not VR. Don't even go into VR right away. You basically just learn how to like put a box in Unity, put some code on it so that it pulsates or changes color or whatever. and then you can make a little first-person shooter game. Actually, it's not that very hard. There's little assets you can drag into, like player controllers, and so basically making yourself familiar with the tools in separately from each other first is good. For the 3D package, you just go to a website like Digital Tutors or another website that has really great tutorial, and you learn how to create a game environment. And you don't even worry about Unity or VR. You in your 3D tool, Max, Maya, C4D, Modo, and you're learning how to use that. And basically, little by little, you learn enough about each tool to put it all together. I think that's one way to go. Additionally, something that worked really, really hard, and I was lobbying hard for this, is to have the teams of two, the pairs. I think that's really massively awesome. So whether it's at home, like home projects through the web, or maybe it's at a university, at school, or maybe it's at work, like Robbie and I did, is that you work with one other person that has like mad skills you don't have, but that person looks at you like you have skills that he or she doesn't have. So basically together you learn from each other. And Stefan, I worked with Stefan very closely. Robbie worked with Rob Yagnow very closely. And both Rob and Stefan are like hardcore developers. Now Robbie and I know enough about code to get in trouble. We can build stuff, you can try them. And these people kind of really mentored us, and we mentored them as well about UX and design and even maybe certain tricks in the tools. So it just helps you create things, and it's very rewarding. So that person who's listening, who's like, oh boy, I know about this stuff, but I don't know anything about programming. I don't know what variable is. I get really confused. It's fine. Grab somebody who's like excited to work with you, who knows all about that stuff, and just kind of like, work together. Team code like on the same screen, because it's only two people. I could go on forever about this. In Chrome, a visual designer named Sébastien Gabriel. He's very known on Dribbble and Twitter and stuff, and he's a fantastic visual designer in Chrome. He and I just like made quite the pair. I felt like we could move mountains because I could build crazy prototypes that move like hell, and he had all these amazing visuals, all DPIs. It all made super sense, and it was just beautiful work. But each of us couldn't do it by ourselves. And having 10 people working on it together would actually not be as productive as just 2 people. So there you go. Manifesto for pairs.
And I want to add one more thing. If you're listening to this and you're new to 3D completely, a lot of people who are new stress out about like which 3D tool to use. Should I use Maya? Should I use C4D? Should I use Blender? And I myself was freaking out hardcore about this. I was watching these crazy YouTube videos, like animated cartoons telling me Maya is better than C4D, and then I'd watch another video with someone else telling me C4D is better than Maya. And so a lot of professionals also kind of like dismiss this question. They always say, oh, it's not the tool doesn't matter, it's about what you do with it. Or the truth is, all the tools can do all the same things. So Blender, Modo, C4D, Maya, and a bunch of others that I didn't name, they can all do the exact same stuff. So on one hand, the tool does not matter. And the one part where I do like really empathize with the question, like which tool should I actually choose? Because you're going to be investing a lot of time in learning this tool, and you don't want to waste time and then ramp up on a new tool later. The thing I empathize with is every UI for the tool is a little bit different. So even though they can all do the same thing, perhaps one of the UIs is more apt for your style of thinking or the way you like to work. So for me, I would recommend maybe choose like two 3D packages which you're most interested in. Just download the trial, do the 30-day trial, and just like check out the interface. Don't worry about what they can actually do, because trust me, they can all do the exact same thing. But think about, like, is this tool behaving in the way I would expect it, and compare the two. So for me, I learned Cinema 4D for about 6 months, and then I learned Maya for about 8 months because I was second guessing myself. And then I decided that I just liked the way the UI was in Cinema 4D. So I switched back to Cinema 4D. I've been doing that for maybe another year now. So I just really, I know it's a tough question and they all do the same thing and the tool doesn't matter. But if you're struggling with that answer, just try it out and see what you think of the UI.
Yeah, I guess when I think about it, the same thing probably goes for current 2D design tools like Sketch, Illustrator, things like that. Just what those UIs are geared for. But yeah, excellent advice. Thank you guys both again for coming on. It's been an excellent show, I think. So I will definitely put a bunch of links in the description to all the IO talks so everybody can get caught up on what we're talking about. Yeah.
Awesome.
So yeah, just thank you guys for
Thanks
joining
for having
me.
us. It was a lot of
Yeah.
fun.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Have a good day. Thanks everybody for listening.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.